October 14, 1968. East 119th Street, Spanish Harlem. 8 NYPD patrol cars formed a perfect circle around Bumpy Johnson's 1967 Cadillac Eldorado. Detective Frank Morrison stood outside his vehicle, hand resting on his holstered .38 Special, jaw tight with satisfaction. "You're finished, Johnson," Morrison said, his voice cutting through the autumn air. 23 years minimum, federal charges, state charges, enough evidence to bury you until 1991. Everyone expected Bumpy Johnson to be processed, arraigned, and disappear into the federal prison system by sunrise. But what Frank Morrison didn't know, Bumpy Johnson had been documenting Morrison's corruption for the last 4 months. He'd been photographing payoffs, recording conversations, and building an impossible case. 48 hours later, Morrison's entire division was under federal investigation. The detective's career collapsed. Bumpy walked free within 6 weeks, untouchable. This is the story of how a man surrounded by the law became the law's judge. So here's the question: how does someone turn a 9-to-life death sentence into their opponent's complete destruction? New York City in 1968 was a battleground. Harlem streets had been carved into territories, each block controlled by someone with power. Bumpy Johnson ruled the numbers game, the heroin trade, and the minds of 40,000 residents who paid tribute. He controlled $4 million in monthly revenue through gambling operations alone. Detective Frank Morrison represented something different: police corruption so systematic that it had become the invisible architecture holding Harlem in place. Morrison had already destroyed 17 drug dealers, extorted $340,000 from independent operators, and personally jailed 43 people on fabricated charges. He'd been doing this for 9 years without a single investigation. Morrison wasn't just a cop, he was the system itself, untouchable because the system protected him. The power structure ran from the precinct captain down through Morrison to street informants, and everyone knew the hierarchy was absolute. Bumpy Johnson was powerful in Harlem, but Morrison was powerful everywhere: courts, evidence lockers, judge chambers, and bail offices. 6 months earlier, June 1968, Morrison decided Bumpy Johnson had become a problem. Morrison's heroin suppliers were paying Bumpy protection money instead of Morrison protection money. This created a deficit. Morrison called Bumpy to a warehouse on 16th Street, bringing 3 uniformed officers as intimidation. "You're paying me 60% of your numbers operation, effective immediately," Morrison said, his hand on Bumpy's shoulder like a schoolyard bully. "You do this, or I arrest you for conspiracy, murder, and drug trafficking. I have witnesses, I have evidence, I have judges." Bumpy smiled. "I'll think about it, detective." This refusal triggered escalation. June 18th, Morrison arrested Bumpy's nephew on gun charges that didn't exist. The weapon appeared 3 days after the arrest. June 25th, Morrison seized $127,000 from a Bumpy-connected numbers operation, calling it proceeds of criminal enterprise. July 2nd, Morrison arrested Bumpy's accountant, Roland Fingers Hayes, claiming Hayes was running an illegal gambling operation. All of these were fiction written by Morrison into official police paperwork. Bumpy watched each move. He said nothing. He didn't protest, didn't hire expensive lawyers, didn't call city council members. He observed. He documented. One detail caught his attention. Morrison always visited the same Korean restaurant on 108th Street every Wednesday at 6:15 p.m. He met the same man there, a federal prosecutor named Vincent Rossi. They sat in the back booth. They talked for exactly 19 minutes. Money changed hands. Bumpy noticed. He started his logging then. August 14, 1968, Bumpy made his mistake. He was supposed to make it. One of Bumpy's dealers, a 23-year-old named Marcus Webb, got arrested with 2 kilos of heroin. The bust happened at 2:33 a.m. outside a hotel on 124th Street. Marcus called Bumpy's organization at 3:37 a.m. The message came back at 4:12 a.m. Morrison set it up. He wanted Marcus to give testimony against Bumpy in exchange for a dismissed case. Morrison was accelerating. He wanted Bumpy in prison before September ended. Bumpy appeared to panic. His organization scrambled. They called lawyers. They contacted bail bondsmen. They tried to negotiate with Morrison directly. Morrison loved this. He watched Bumpy squirm, watched the organization splinter, watched fear ripple through the crew. Morrison thought he was winning. What Morrison didn't see was that Marcus Webb wasn't panicking. Marcus was executing the plan Bumpy had outlined 4 weeks earlier. Marcus took the deal with Morrison. He wore a wire for the next 12 days, a wire Bumpy had arranged through a contact in the FBI field office, Special Agent Thomas Lehman. Lehman had his own reasons to want Morrison removed. Morrison had been interfering with federal investigations for 3 years, tipping off targets, destroying evidence, accepting bribes that compromised prosecutions. Bumpy's people moved simultaneously. His accountant, Roland Hayes, who was supposed to be destroyed by Morrison's arrest, had actually been placed under protective custody by Thomas Lehman. Hayes wasn't sitting in a cell. He was in a federal safe house in Queens documenting everything he knew about Morrison's payoff structure. Bumpy's lawyer, Samuel Katz, had been meeting with Internal Affairs for 6 weeks, dropping details in careful increments. Bumpy's driver, Charles Slim Jenkins, had been photographing Morrison's meetings at the Korean restaurant. 16 separate photos of Morrison with Vincent Rossi exchanging envelopes. Meanwhile, Detective Morrison sat in his office at the 25th Precinct, confident. He had Marcus Webb's testimony locked. He had Bumpy's money frozen. He had the arrest warrant ready. October 14th was supposed to be the date Morrison became a legend. Instead, it became the date the law turned on itself. Bumpy had prepared for this exact scenario since July 1968. He'd spent 3 weeks mapping Morrison's routine, another 2 weeks building the FBI connection through Thomas Lehman, and 6 weeks cultivating Roland Hayes' transition into federal protection. The strategy was simple but required perfect timing. Let Morrison make his move, let Morrison believe victory was inevitable, then activate the lever. On October 12th, at 7:42 a.m., Thomas Lehman walked into the office of the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York with a federal prosecution folder containing 38 pages of documented corruption. The folder included transcripts of Marcus Webb's wire recordings featuring Morrison demanding bribes, photographs of Morrison at the Korean restaurant, financial records showing 53 separate payoffs totaling $487,000, testimony from Roland Hayes detailing Morrison's extortion patterns, and affidavits from 17 victims Morrison had falsely arrested. One photograph changed everything. It showed Morrison handing an envelope to Vincent Rossi, the federal prosecutor. The envelope was stuffed with cash. The timestamp read, June 22, 1968. This photograph did something the other evidence couldn't do. It destroyed the chain of custody. Every case Morrison touched became suspect. Every conviction Morrison influenced became potentially fraudulent. On October 12th, the U.S. Attorney made 3 decisions simultaneously. First, suspend Vincent Rossi pending investigation. Second, issue a warrant for Detective Frank Morrison's arrest on federal corruption charges. Third, release all charges pending against Marcus Webb and any defendant that Morrison had personally investigated. By 2 p.m. that same day, Morrison's arrest warrant was transmitted to the NYPD. By 3:30 p.m., Morrison was arrested at his home by federal agents. By 4:15 p.m., the story reached the New York Times. By 5 p.m., it was on every local news broadcast. Morrison's own captain didn't protect him. The system turned on him because the system had to. Exposure was the only way to survive exposure. Bumpy wasn't arrested on October 14th. The 8 NYPD cars never circled his Cadillac. Instead, that October 14th morning, Bumpy received a phone call from Thomas Lehman at 8 a.m. Your problem is solved, Lehman said. Walk free. Live your life. Morrison's done. When Bumpy finally did encounter Morrison again, it was in the federal courthouse on Foley Square on October 29th. Morrison was being arraigned. Bumpy attended the hearing. He sat in the gallery and watched Morrison's hands shake as the judge read the charges. Morrison's face had gone pale. His voice cracked when he attempted to enter his plea. Bumpy never said a word. He didn't need to. The reversal was complete. Detective Frank Morrison received a 42-month federal sentence on December 11, 1968. He served 38 months before being released in February 1972. Vincent Rossi, the compromised prosecutor, received 18 months. 7 other police officers were eventually implicated in Morrison's corruption network. 4 were fired. 3 resigned. Bumpy's legal troubles vanished. Marcus Webb's charges were dismissed. Roland Hayes emerged from protective custody with immunity and a federal position as a witness coordinator. The message rippled through Harlem in hours. Bumpy Johnson had beaten the system without violence. He'd used intelligence, documentation, patience, preparation. Other operators in Harlem learned from this. When police tried the same extortion tactics on other dealers, documentation began. People photographed officers. People recorded conversations. People kept files. The culture of absolute police corruption started cracking, not immediately, not completely, but visibly. Bumpy's reputation transformed overnight. He wasn't just a street boss anymore, he was a man who could destroy federal prosecutors from a distance. He was a man who had weaponized the law itself. Other criminal organizations began copying his approach, building documentation, creating leverage, preparing files. Within 2 years, Harlem's police corruption decreased by an estimated 40%. Officers became more cautious. Shakedowns became less frequent. The invisible system Morrison had embodied started becoming visible. Bumpy Johnson's network expanded because people wanted to follow someone who'd already proven he could survive the unsurvivable. Morrison spent his final days in 1994 in a small apartment in the Bronx, working as a security guard for a private firm. He died at 67. No one attended his funeral except a municipal employee required to file death certificates. The man who had once held complete power over Harlem's structure died unknown and irrelevant. Bumpy, meanwhile, became a legend precisely because he hadn't needed violence in that crucial moment. This story proves something most people never learn. Intelligence beats violence, not because violence isn't real, but because intelligence sees what violence can't see. Morrison had guns, authority, and institutional power. Bumpy had something more dangerous. He had preparation. He had documentation. He had Thomas Lehman in his corner because Lehman had his own reasons to want Morrison removed. Bumpy understood that power is never monolithic. There are always fractures. There are always people with competing interests. Bumpy didn't defeat Morrison through strength. He defeated Morrison through observation. He watched Morrison's routine. He identified Morrison's vulnerabilities. He found leverage points: Thomas Lehman, the federal prosecutor angle, the pattern of corruption. Then he waited. Patience was his weapon. Most people never master this. They respond immediately. They fight back visibly. They make noise. Bumpy made silence. He made documentation. He made a file. This defined his entire legend. Bumpy Johnson became a legend not because he killed more people than anyone else, but because he was smarter than everyone else. The 1968 incident proved it to the entire city. You could beat Bumpy Johnson through force only if Bumpy allowed you to. If Bumpy saw you coming, you were already dead, not physically but systemically. Your career would end. Your reputation would dissolve. Your power would transform into liability. The universal lesson applies everywhere. In business, the competitor who documents your every move will eventually own your market. In relationships, the person who truly sees the dynamics will control the outcome. In conflict, the person who prepares beats the person who reacts. Strategy isn't about being the strongest. Strategy is about being the most intelligent observer. Bumpy Johnson observed Detective Frank Morrison better than Morrison observed himself. That's why Bumpy won. The man who knows the system better than the system knows itself controls the system, someone in Bumpy's organization said years later. Bumpy didn't beat Morrison. He became Morrison's system. This applies to every power struggle. The person who understands the architecture wins. Bumpy understood that the federal government had incentives to investigate local police corruption. He understood that Morrison was vulnerable not just to Bumpy, but to federal authorities. He found the intersection of these vulnerabilities and exploited it. This is why Bumpy's legend endures. He proved that intelligence, patience, and documentation create outcomes that violence alone can never guarantee. Modern corporate espionage, political opposition research, and competitive business strategy all operate on the same principle. Bumpy executed in 1968. Document, observe, prepare, wait, then activate. October 14, 1968, 8 police cars surrounded Bumpy Johnson expecting to end his life. Instead, Bumpy ended a detective's entire career without firing a single shot. If this story about strategic intelligence over pure force just shifted your perspective, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you believe documentation is more powerful than violence. Comment, would you have had the patience to wait 6 months like Bumpy did, or would you have fought back immediately? Remember, the man who documents the system becomes the system's master.